What's up YouTube? Today, to celebrate the release of my new class, Shopify Theme Development with Vue.js, I'm going to share a quick tutorial on how we can use Vue.js with Shopify's own Predictive Search API to create a dynamic product search page. Vue.js is a front-end JavaScript framework that we can use to build interactive user interfaces. I'm talking about interfaces where the interactions happen purely on the front end. Using Vue.js is my preferred way to create purely front-end interactions, as it's much more efficient than opting out of a framework and much simpler to use in my opinion compared to other frameworks like React or Angular. All we have to do is include a script tag to bring in the Vue.js script, create an options object, and then pass that into a create app method. It's that simple. Now, instead of writing long lines of JavaScript or having to wait for annoying page reloads, we can set up a data structure, bind that to our HTML structure, and then dynamically update the data all on the front end. In today's video, I'm going to share one example of using Vue.js in Shopify Theme Development, and that is to create a product search page for our Shopify theme. We'll learn how to quickly set up a Vue.js app, retrieve a list of items from the Search API, and then update the list of those items based on the value passed in to the search bar by a user. So without further ado, let's jump onto the computer and let's get started. All right, so I'm going to start off this tutorial inside the usual spot inside my development store, Chris Testing Shop. You can see here that I've already loaded in Vue class theme into the live theme. This is the theme code that we use throughout the Skillshare class, and I'm going to be using it for today's tutorial as well. If you'd like to access this theme code and use it as well, you can go to my GitHub page, github.com/ChristopherDodd, and look for Vue class theme. Under this drop down here, you can see there's a few different branches that represent different stages of completed code in the project as we go through in the Skillshare class. I'm going to add another branch here for when we complete the code in today's tutorial for the search page. So check out this repo when you're watching the video, and you should be able to see the completed code for today's video in there as well. Okay. If you haven't yet installed this theme code onto your Shopify store, you can simply click this button, download the zip, and then upload it straight to your store via this button. All right. But I've already got it here in my store. If I click on actions and then view, you can see we've got a very simple theme, nothing on the home page. We just got a product page for shopping a t-shirt, a collection page, and a cart page. Now this is all interactive using Vue. This is what we do in the Skillshare class. So if you want to know how I actually went about this, that's all in the Skillshare class. But I thought in this video what I would do is add a search page here as well. And the reason why it makes sense to use Vue to create this search page is because we can get all the data for the search through an Ajax API that will return JSON. So that means that we can get all the data through the front end without having to reload the page. And Vue makes it really easy to take data and update UI. All right, so to learn how the Predictive Search API works, we can just search for Shopify Predictive Search API in Google. I've misspelt it there, but you can see here, it's the first result that comes up. You're just looking for this page on the Shopify documentation. Here you can see where the endpoint is and the different parameters that go in. And if we scroll down, here is an example of the response that you'll get back. All right, so this is perfect. We just need to create a Vue app and plug this API into it, and then we can create a nice interactive search page, okay? This will be in the search page branch. So if you want to check out that code, that's where you'll find it. Otherwise, I'm just going to copy across the code now. All right, so all the CSS is in there now. I'm going to close that CSS file. And what we're going to have to do is create a custom page template to load in this search page. So I'm going to head to our templates folder, click new file, create an alternate page template. So the syntax goes like this: page.name of the alternate template.liquid. And inside here, I'm going to open up a div with the ID of search. And then below it, open up some script tags, which is where we're going to put our Vue code. All right. Now, before we actually write the Vue code, I'm going to load this alternate template into an actual page. So inside our store, we're going to have to go to pages, click add page, going to call this search. And then here I'm going to select the alternate template, which is page.search. Keep in mind, guys, that this needs to exist on the live theme. So if you're currently working with this theme on a preview, add a template with the suffix of page.search to the live theme as well. This is something we learned in my first Skillshare class on the subject called Shopify Theme Development. All right, I'll hit save on that. And now I'm going to click View Page. And as you can see, there's nothing there yet because we haven't written pretty much any code yet. All right, so one more thing before I create the Vue instance is there's a very handy tool that I highly recommend. As you can see here, I'm using the browser Google Chrome. I'm not sure what the options are on the browser you're using, but for Chrome, we can download something called the Vue DevTools. So I'm going to head to Chrome Web Store, go into here, search for Vue DevTools. And as you can see here, we've got two. We've got this one with all the reviews, and then this one with less reviews and a beta flag on the Vue logo here. So the difference between these two is this one works with Vue version 1 and 2, and this one works with version 3 of Vue. Now in this tutorial and in the Skillshare class, I use Vue 3. So for that, we're going to need to use this version of the DevTools. If you're, of course, using Vue version 2 or 1, then you can use this. But if you're following along completely from scratch and you want to use the latest version of Vue, definitely use this one. All right, so as you can see, I've already got this added to my Chrome extensions. And to show you that it's there, I'm going to press Command-Option-I to open up my DevTools. And I'll have to click on this to see all my tabs, but you can see the last one is Vue. I'm going to click on that. Let me zoom in so you can see easier. As you can see here, I'm inside my header app here. So I've got a header instance. If we head on to the product page, you can see that we've got header and product. If I head into the cart page, you can see we've got two Vue apps, header and cart. So what we're going to do is on the search page, create an app that'll go underneath header, and that'll be our app to do the search. Okay, don't get confused by the term app here. We can have multiple Vue apps on the one website. If we were creating a single page application, then there would of course just be one app. But because we're plugging Vue into different pages of our website, into different parts of an existing website, then we can write the code separately for each area. Okay. All right, so let's get started writing some Vue.js code. I'll just direct you to the reference here. In case you get lost at any point. This is the Vue.js reference. Just make sure that you're looking at the right version of documentation. So here it says you're browsing the documentation for V2. Click here for V3. So that's a little gotcha there. So as you can see, the website looks exactly the same, but we've just got V3 in front, okay? And here you go into the docs. Right here is your reference for everything Vue.js version 3. Let's head over to our code editor now and actually write some code. I'm going to be doing this using the Options API approach. There is a new approach in Vue 3 called the Composition API, but we're sticking with the Options API, which is the standard one that we used in Vue 1 and Vue 2. Okay, so that involves creating a options object. I'm going to call this search page options. I'm just going to open up an empty object for now. And then to create the actual app, I'm going to create an app, store it in this variable called search page, and we just need to Vue create app, load in those search page options as the argument, and then let's mount that to our DOM. So by putting in the selector ID search, it's going to mount it to this HTML right here. Just a reminder before we actually load this up, you're going to have to include the code for Vue as well if you haven't already. So inside my layout file, you can see here, I've got a script tag for bringing in Vue. If you want to learn how to do that, you can go into installation of the documentation and then scroll down. There is this nice little script tag that you can just paste in. But as you can see, I've already got that included inside my Vue class theme. That's just if you're going to be doing your own theme, you're going to have to definitely bring in that code. Okay? All right, so now that being said, we should be able to view this Vue app inside our DevTools now. So if I refresh the page on our search page, click over here, you can see we've got app 2. Now that's not a very user-friendly name. So in our options object, I'm going to add in the name of search page. This is just for our purposes on the dev side to see what the app is called. All right. Refresh the page over here, and we want to switch from header to search page. Now you can see we are accessing a Vue app on this page. But of course, there is currently nothing else inside this options object. So we're going to need to populate that right now. So how this is going to work is we're going to have a search field, and then we're going to have search results. So I'm going to build some HTML right now inside our div. In addition to having the ID of search, I'm going to give this the class of container. This is already set up in our CSS. And then I'm going to create a div with the class of search box. Inside, I'm going to create an input field with the type of text, the placeholder of search term, and then I'm going to put in an empty label here. We'll populate this a little later with Vue data. The next thing is I'm going to create a H1, a heading for search results, and then create a div for the search results. So I'm going to give this div the class of search results, and I'll show you how to create the loop of search results in just a second. Okay, so that's our little boilerplate code there. Refresh the page. There you can see the styles that I've put in the CSS already applying there. Okay, all right, so how this is going to work is inside our instance, we're going to store some data. We're going to store the search term, and we're going to store the items that are returned from the API. Okay, so how we do that in Vue.js is creating this data function inside the options object, and this data function will return an object. All right. Now, initially, before we run a request to the API, we're going to have empty data. So let's just set up that right now. I'm going to create an items array because that's what we're going to be cycling through. And I'm also going to actually, before that, have a search term string as well. I'm also going to add a loading state here. And let's just set that to true because I want to search something on page load. So let's just put in here a search term of shoes. And so when this page loads, because items are empty and they're going to be populated on page load, we can set loading to true. And you'll see why this is important in just a second. All right, so saving that and refreshing our page over here, we can now see in the DevTools that we've got data showing up. We've got an items array that's empty, loading is set to true, and search term is shoes. Okay, so we've got our data set up, or at least the beginnings of it. Now what I want to do is create a method that will actually do our search. So I'm going to add another parameter here called methods, open up this object and create a method that is simply going to be called search. And inside it, I'm going to add an argument of term. Okay, so that'll be the search term. Now, every time we run search, it's going to be an asynchronous request to the API. So at first, loading should be set to true. Okay, then once the API request comes back, we can set loading to false. All right, so let's go over to the documentation for the predictive search API and copy some code from there. Predictive search API, Shopify. Heading back to the reference here. If I scroll down, you can see some example code using fetch. You can also see an example call using jQuery. We might as well use the fetch version. That way we don't have to use jQuery if we don't want to. I'm going to copy this, bring this over into the search method, indent a little, and down here, I'm going to remove the code in here. And what I want to do instead is just do a console log of product suggestions and see what comes back from the API. Okay, let me just indent this some more. Now, the other thing we're going to have to do is, as you can see here in this query, we're going to query flannel. So obviously that needs to change. I'm going to change this string to backticks so we can insert our own variables. and instead I'm going to put the search term here. So remember, we put the term through in here in our method. So this is now going to go into this API endpoint here. So hopefully you've had some experience with Ajax APIs in the past, but essentially what we're doing here is using the fetch method to hit this endpoint, and then when the response comes back, we're JSON parsing it, and then we're taking that response and working with it. All right. So obviously when we hit this last then, it is finished loading. So we're going to set this dot loading equal to false. All right, so that should be enough to get us started. The only thing here is we actually need to run this method. So what I'm going to do is tap into something in Vue called a lifecycle hook. This is basically an event for different parts of the lifecycle of the Vue instance. All right, so two common ones are created and mounted. I'm going to use the created lifecycle hook. It is a method on this options object, and essentially any code we put in here is going to be run when the instance is created. So essentially on page load. So here I'm going to put this search, and then for the search term, I'm going to reference this search term. So the argument that's going to be sent through as the term here in this method is whatever is currently set on the data of the instance, which is going to be shoes on page load. Okay, so I'm going to head back to our page. Let's move the reference over there, refresh the page. And what we're doing is we're not actually updating our Vue instance yet. We've just console logged the response. So if I head into console, you can see we've got a response back from the API with 4 items. Here you can see all the different data for the 4 items that come back from the search term shoes. Okay. Now, of course, console logging them isn't going to help us much with our search page here. What we want to do is get them to actually show up on the page. So instead of a console log, what I'm going to do is load these product suggestions into the items array of our instance data. Okay, this dot items equals product suggestions. Now, when we save and reload the page, we won't have that console log, but if we go back to our Vue instance, you can see here that we now have the items loaded into the data of our Vue instance. And that now allows us to data bind them to elements on the page. All right, so what we're going to do now is build this search results section. Let's head back to the code. And inside here, what I'm going to do is first add a v-if up here. Now, essentially what this does is this element will only show if this condition is true. So that's how we do an if statement basically in Vue.js. And what I want to ensure is that items.length is greater than 0, because if items.length isn't greater than 0, we don't have any items coming back and nothing will display anyway. So what I want to do is, if that's the case, create a else statement here. And so this will trigger if that statement isn't true. And in that instance, there's only really 2 possibilities. 1, it's loading, or 2, there were no results that came back from the search. So I'm going to nest an if statement in here and say v-if loading. Then we're going to write this basic loading indicator, just loading with 3 dots, and then put the v-else there of your search returned no matches. Okay, so back inside here, what I'm going to do is create a loop. And how we do that in Vue, we combine it with HTML. I'm going to give all these classes based on what I've set up in the CSS. We want to create as many of these divs as there are items in the array. So how we do that is add an attribute called v4. And then inside we do item in items. And now we can reference each object in that array. Okay, so now I'm going to open up an A tag. And then inside I'm going to add an image tag with the class of search item image and the title here of search item title. And now what I'm going to do is add in dynamic values based on this object to populate these HTML elements. The way I do that is by putting a colon in front of the attribute to make it dynamic. So usually in your anchor tag, you would have a href and then you would put in an explicit value. What we can do to use a variable inside of here instead of an absolute value is to put a colon in front of the href, and then we can put in item.url. So if you want to know what attributes we're looking for, we can just inspect the data inside our Vue DevTools. And here you can see there is an attribute called URL, and that will direct us to the actual product. So we can put in the value of that attribute right there. Over here for SRC, as normal, we could put in an SRC field and put in an absolute value, but instead we want to substitute the value of the attribute in here. So I'm going to put a colon in front of the SRC, and then what we want to put in here is the value of item.image. So again, looking back at the code, the image field here has the URL of the image. So we can slot that in there. And then here for the title, we can use a field called vhtml to insert text. And we're just going to type in item.title, which again is here on this object. There you can see it right there. All right, so now if I save, refresh the page over here, we've got an error, cannot read length of undefined. Let me check why that's the case. I put item here, not items. So saving that again, refreshing the page, you can see the search results for shoes have now come up and are displaying on our page. So now our user interface is reflecting, wrong app. Need to click on search page. Our user interface is now reflecting what we have here. Now, of course, this is not very interactive because we're already setting the search term. So we're not allowing the user to actually create their own search term. So what we're going to do is bind this data value to the value of this input field. And then on the change event, we're going to run the search method. Okay. So how we do that, heading back to our code up here on the input field, I'm going to add an attribute called vModel, and that's going to bind the value of this input to whatever I put here. So I'm going to bind it to search term. And then when it changes, what I'm going to do is trigger our method, which as you can see down here is search with an argument that equals the search term. So we're going to do search and then search term. Notice here in the actual HTML code, we don't have to make reference to this. The reference to this is implied. Okay. Save that, and let me refresh over here. Now you can see, because there's two-way data binding, that this value here that we've set on the instance explicitly is now in our input field. And if I change this instead to like sneakers and then hit enter to trigger that change event, you can see the search results have now updated. All right, and I can change this to shoelace because I know there's a shoelace in my store. Or I can set this to shirt, hit enter, and now the search results for shirt come back. It's that simple, guys. If we look inside the network tab here, and I'll just clear all the other network activity. If we go in here, shoes, you can see it's hitting that endpoint and returning this data, to which we're then inserting directly in our Vue instance and then reactively updating our UI. Now that's basically the core functionality right there, guys, but I want to add a few more things to this code before we commit and finish up this tutorial. Number one, I want to create a link to this page. So I'm just going to go in to the layout file theme.liquid, which is where I have my header. I'm going to copy this link right here, paste it below. The URL to the page is page/search. Put in the text search products. And that'll give us the opportunity to navigate to that page whenever we want. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but we're only doing loading when items.length is 0. And the problem with that is if we're going from one search to another, where the first search did have items in the array, and then we're going to another search with items in the array, the state of the items array never actually gets down to 0. So we should really fix this. How we're going to do that is up here, let's add this loading state, and then we can make this an else if, and then we can make this an else. Okay, let's refresh the page, head over to our Vue instance, look at what happens when we load the page. It's loading quite fast, so we're going to have to be quick to look at it. But as you can see here, it's loading on page load. Now let's see what happens when we switch to another search term. You can see it goes to loading. Now, obviously, we'd want to make that a bit nicer, like have a loading indicator or perhaps have a nice transition, but we won't do that in this particular class. Another instance is if we hit enter with no search term, it's coming back with these results. I'm not sure why. Let's head into our network tab and see what happens. If I click on clear and let's search a blank. So go shoes, then let's go to blank and then hit enter. Let's see what happens here. Scrolling down, you can see that we still get products loaded from the API when there is no offering a search term at all. Maybe we want that, but probably not. So I think we should handle that case. So what I'm going to do is add another condition here, and search term does not equal blank. And then what I'm going to do is use this label field that we created to put in a message. Okay, so I'm going to add another attribute here to our data called message. I'm going to load that into this label using VHTML. As simple as that. And now we need to set the message. So when we run search, let's only run this code if the term is not blank. So I'm going to copy all of this code, put it into this if statement, and then we're going to say if term is not blank, run this code. If it is blank, we'll update the message. This dot message equals please enter a search term. Now that message is going to stay there permanently unless we reset it. So up here, I'm going to set that message back to empty if we do actually get a match back. Actually, we want to make sure that the product suggestions.length is greater than 0, so I'm going to put it in there instead. All right, refresh the page over here. It loads shoes on page load, but if I try and run without a search term, it's going to have please enter a search term in there. And if I go sneakers, that message will disappear. But if I go back to trying to run without a search term again, it'll say please enter a search term. Another idea is that we might not want to run a search on page load, so do not have this default search. So I'm going to remove this .search from the created lifecycle hook and shoes from the search term, and let's just have a look at what happens when we load the page without running search on page load. Here you can see we've got search term and search results, and it just stuck on loading. So we don't want that to be the case. Here on loading, let's set that to false as a default value. And we're still going to have loading set to true when we start that AJAX request, so we don't have an issue there. But what we can do here is set the message by default to please enter a search term. So this is going to be the default state when the page first loads. Okay, refresh the page over here. And unfortunately, we got your search return no matches. So we want to get rid of this section altogether on page load. So how we can do that is instead of having the check for search term here, I'm going to remove it from there, and let's wrap all of this in another v-if. So div v-if, let's cut all of this code, paste it in there, save that, head back to our page, still showing that section. Let's have a look at our Vue data right now. Search term is blank, which is interesting. Oh, actually, I misspelt the variable here. It's search term in camel case, not with the underscore. So that probably explains the error. Now we've got our default state here, and if I type in sneakers, you can see we get the search result back, shoes. But the problem is it's responding straight away to when the search term changes. So that's not going to work. We're going to have to refactor this. And let's do another field called last search. I'll create that in here. Last search on page load is going to be empty, of course. And then we're going to set last search
after we actually search for it. So if the term is not blank, we're going to set this dot last search to the term. All right, let's try that now. Shoes, hitting enter without a search term says please enter a search term, but keeps those results. If I put in sneakers, now you can see it goes loading and then it loads those sneakers. If I put in shoelace, it has a loading state and then loads the search results. If I put in shirt, same thing. And then again, attempting to search without a search term, I get this message, please enter a search term. So those are a few ways we can clean up our app here. Of course, in terms of UI and design, we could do a lot better here. We could have a better loading state rather than just loading ... We could use transitions in Vue. We could have a sidebar on this page as well. But the important thing here is what Vue is doing. What we're doing here is we're essentially taking data from an API, putting it into a Vue instance, and binding that data with our user interface, connecting that all together so that we have an interactive page on the front end. We don't need to reload a new page because the data is being loaded in via Ajax and we're updating the UI based on Vue. So this is an example of how we can use Vue in Shopify theme development. More common examples I would think of using Vue in Shopify theme development would be the product page. So on product pages with multiple variants, we need to handle variant selection on the front end. So when we change these options, we need to recalculate the variant so that when we click the add to cart button, the correct variant gets added. And also this gets updated on the front end. Also the cart page, we can make this a lot more interactive using Vue. As you can see here, I'm loading my cart app here. And so if I click add to cart, it'll get added to cart straight away without a page reload. And I can change the quantity of any of these items. Pretty sure I showed you a little bit of this before, but essentially that's what I teach in the full Skillshare class on using Vue in Shopify theme development. I encourage you to check that one out. Otherwise, if you have any questions about today's video, definitely leave them in the comments. I hope you can see the benefit in using Vue in Shopify theme development. It's something that I've done recently with the latest website I've been working on, and it has been a good way to up my skills in Shopify theme development. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll catch you on the next one.